and your nice fit dresses. And you can also wear your heels, flats, and your boots and dress shoes with this. And if you're still unsure, you should still ask just in case.
So our next slide is just going to go over common questions you'll get during an interview and how to answer them. So the first one is generally just tell me about yourself. And this is a really open question that people do tend to get a bit carried away regarding. And so it's really important to keep in mind that you stay focused on things that are relevant and you don't give your entire life story. So for example, if you are interviewing, this can work for a job or for a potential college, but if you're interviewing for a college admissions, you don't necessarily want to go into you were born and like the whole story. Really just focus on key events in your life that you think have shaped you and would be applicable to the interview. The next question that's very common would be your biggest strength and weakness. Strength is really broad. Don't worry too much about it. Just go ahead and be honest. With your weakness, you should be honest as well, of course, but make sure it's something that you've actually committed to solving and explain on how you're solving / working on them. So for example, if I have a problem with time management, I could basically say like, oh, one of my biggest weaknesses is time management, but I've gone ahead and started using a calendar and bought an agenda and have actually taken these very concrete steps in these past few weeks to address this issue. And so you want to make sure whatever weakness you bring up, you actually have a plan in terms of how you're going about solving it. And this plan has already begun to be implemented, just to show that, yes, you may have this problem, but you are the type of person to go ahead and try to fix that issue. The next really common question would be, why are you the best candidate? And this is also very broad as well, but just make sure you look into the school or the company beforehand and try to discuss how your core values align in comparison to theirs. So if the school is really well known for, like let's say in their main mission statement, they talk a lot about team building, a lot about community. If it's like a small liberal arts college and you can see that they care a lot about, how students interact with one another, talk a lot about how that aspect of your personality would fit well in that school, and also give really relevant and unique experiences that would set you apart from other candidates. So instead of being really broad, like, I'm generally good at this or that, you can always bring up a specific time in which you demonstrated that skill. You want to show more than tell. So if there's a way for you to give that concrete experience, that's going to resonate more with the interviewer than if you were to give a general broad statement that anyone else could give. Another common question would be, give an example of a time in which you had conflict and how did you resolve it? Just be ready, have an example ready. This one shouldn't be too difficult. Just make sure you have a really clear, concise past experience that you can bring up and you would be comfortable sharing with the interviewer. And this brings us to our next slide, which is common mistakes that are made. So the first one is just arriving late. I know Kat already talked about this, but always come 5 to 10 minutes early to an interview. Honestly, 10 to 15 if you can. If you're driving physically to the place, you don't want to get lost. If you're going on Zoom and your computer crashes, that also isn't the best look. So really just make sure everything's prepped beforehand and that you are going to be punctual and early. The next common mistake that's made would be just not knowing enough about the place or position you're applying for. It's super important that you do your research. If I'm applying to a college, I don't want to say, oh, I'm so excited to go to XY University because it has amazing professors and great peers and students, because that's really applicable to most universities. You want to make sure that this is something really, really specific to the place so you can show your genuine interest and the fact that you've actually really looked into this company or this school. So with Stanford, for example, it would be great, instead of saying, I absolutely love the professors here, I would say, I'm really interested in political science and I heard about your professor, Larry Diamond, and I loved his research that he did with this project called America in One Room, and I would love to potentially work at his lab in the future. Like, that would be a much more concrete way of showing your interest rather than saying, I love the professors at Stanford. Another thing would be speaking in cliches. You don't necessarily want to go ahead and just say, I'm a good worker, I'm a team player. Give up really unique and specific instances that show this. And it doesn't necessarily need to be this long drawn out story, but it should just be concise and very applicable to you. You have to realize that in these interviews, they are talking to so many students. You really need to make yourself stand out. And if you have those key points or stories or traits that are really individualized and personalized, this will help them remember you in the future, far after the interview is over. Another common mistake made would be not asking questions. Kat did a really good debrief on the types of questions to ask. It's really important that you do ask a few questions at the end of the interview when the interviewer asks you, just to show that you are genuinely interested in working or studying at that place. And lastly, just not making eye contact. Make sure that you make eye contact throughout the interview with your interviewer.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about what to do after your interview. So first off, take a deep breath. Just, step away from wherever you were and just take a walk, relax, and know that you did your very best. I know the interview process can be a little stressful. So, you did it and, you did your best. And also another tip that I feel like I've done myself is I replay the conversations a lot, but I feel like um, don't do that. And I think a constructive way to kind of, if you find yourself doing that, is to write out and journal about how you're feeling about it. And I feel like that can be a constructive way to think about, oh, what are things I feel like I can improve on for future interviews. Um, and then so after you take some time to relax and reflect on the interview, an important thing is to follow up with your interview with a thank you email, sort of within 24 hours after. And it can be like a really short message about thanking them for their time, consideration, for the conversation. And I recommend adding a personal touch to it. Mention something that you or your interviewer may have connected on, and you feel like you to make yourself stand out. And like I feel like people would just appreciate that you were engaged in the conversation, you remembered and appreciated their time. And lastly, if you feel like you made a connection with an interviewer, for example, might be an alumni interviewer. Like personally for me, my alumni interviewer was also from my state, also was a practicing doctor. And so I'm pre-med, so I felt like that was a great opportunity to connect with them on that. And it can be a potential networking opportunity for the future. As I know, I am still in contact with my alumni interviewer, and I can reach out to him about any advice as I go through, being pre-med and preparing for medical school and stuff like that. So yeah, those are just a few tips about what to do after your interview.
Okay, so thank you for coming. So we just had our PowerPoint presentation part of the panel. So now we're going to go into kind of a general Q&A. And then after that, we're going to go into breakout rooms and you'll be able to kind of pick what breakout room you want to join and ask more specific questions. But right now we're going to start off with our first just general question is, so how much does an interview affect an application?
I would say in terms of, because I think that all the things we reviewed are applicable to both if you're applying to a job or you're applying to a college. In terms of job, vary, but in terms of college admissions, they're actually not insanely important. I think that if you have a really standout interview, it can get you into a school. So if you were potentially, going to be waitlisted or something and you have a really amazing interview, it can get you in. So they definitely can hold weight in that way. But if you don't have a good interview, it won't negatively affect you. You would have to truly botch your interview for it to negatively affect you. So if you have an interview and you feel kind of uneasy about it in terms of college, I wouldn't worry about it. It's very unlikely that this is going to make a big change in terms of your application status. The only way that it could really help is or it could really affect you is to help you if you have a really standout one. So I really wouldn't place too much emphasis on it. I definitely would do my best just in case, you were that waitlisted applicant who gets in, but don't stress if it's not going the way you wanted it to.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, if you get an interview, does that mean that you are being seriously considered or not? Does it kind of mean that you're on the higher up on the list, or is it kind of just they give out interviews to kind of whoever?
From my experience, yes, if you get an interview, that means you're sitting pretty nice, which is why I said if you got to the point where you can get an interview, they see something in you. So you just need to harness that and flush out your essence. Because they see something that they like in you. So you just need to keep that in mind. If you get an interview, you're doing good. You're sitting nice.
To add to that though, I also wouldn't be too stressed because on one hand, it can show, positive reinforcement in that way. But also like for me, like personally, I got into Stanford and I was never asked to interview for Stanford. But I was asked to interview for Princeton and I did not get into Princeton. So I think that don't read into it too much at the same time. Sometimes what it is like for Stanford, I live in Southern California. They just had so many people applying. They didn't have enough people to interview me. And it didn't mean anything in that way. So it depends also on the school and a lot of different factors as well.
So if you can recall your college interview, were there any questions that really kind of like stood out or like kind of took you like by surprise?
Yeah, so for me, this sort of goes back to what I said earlier, but I remember for my Princeton interview, the interviewer asked me about like why I was involved in this like particular extracurricular. And like honestly, I hadn't put too much thought into that. And so it did kind of catch me off guard, which is why I sort of mentioned earlier that definitely like be able to explain in more than just a sentence like why you are doing what you're doing and involved with what you're involved in. Like for me, it was just like, well, I care about it, but of course, like you have to elaborate more on that in the actual interview. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Okay, the next question. How did you avoid using verbal fillers during the interview process while still sounding natural / unrehearsed?
So that part really takes more practice. You need to catch on what words tend to be filler. So the so yeah, like literally, it takes a lot of practice and self-awareness. And if you have someone to rehearse interviews with, that's really great. If you have a way to go through them and through answering questions and try to catch yourself when you're about to say or like and you're pondering and you can't find the words that you need, it helps a lot to practice.
Okay, next question. And also feel free to send the questions in the chat or send them to me privately if you want. I'm using questions from the RSVP, but also if you send me a question, I'll ask the question to the panel. So what are some interview red flags?
I suppose a red flag would just be like kind of like we mentioned, don't come late. Also make sure you're wearing appropriate attire. Those are the first two red flags I would think of. Another thing would just be not showing genuine interest in the place of application. So if it's a school and they ask you, why you want to go there, giving that really vague answer, great professors, great campus, great people. Those are some things that I would say to avoid in an interview. But in terms of like really messing up an interview, I feel like that's actually pretty hard, especially with college interviews. It's very unlikely you'll do that unless you somehow insult the interviewer. I don't think that unless you like insult the interviewer, I don't think that your college interview will have a negative impact on you.
Yeah, and if by red flags, that means things to like somewhat of a negative reaction or something from the person who's interviewing you or some sort of sign that they're giving, I really wouldn't read into their reactions too much. Like if they seem that they're like uninterested in what you're talking about, or I don't know, just like don't read into it too much. Like they choose to be an interviewer. It's not like they're being forced to interview people, and so they should genuinely like be interested in whatever it is you're talking about. And I know I tend to be like very self-conscious about like, oh my gosh, I've like taken up too much time, I'm talking too much. Just like don't overthink it, and just know that you've like earned your place there in that interview spot.
Okay, next question. These are kind of like similar questions a lot of people have asked. Is it like okay to repeat like certain topics or certain achievements that you've like highlighted in your essay or like throughout the interview like multiple times?
I wouldn't say it's a terrible thing. I just wouldn't say it's necessarily something that's going to benefit you. If you think about it, like in terms of a written application, you are allowed so many words to tell this person why you deserve to go to their school. Why waste that space like repeating, right? Like if you can show as many different sides of yourself as possible, why just focus on that one side repeatedly? Obviously you want to highlight your strength and make that a large portion of your interview or your essay, but if you can only write 3 like small essays to a school, you don't want to talk about the same thing each time. I just would avoid it. I don't think it's necessarily terrible, but I would say it's not taking advantage of the time and the space that you've been allocated.
Yeah, like if I could just add, I think it sort of what Jasmine said, try to avoid it, but at the same time, like for example with me, I spent a lot of hours on one particular like activity in high school, and there were like different, I guess you could say I gained different skills from it. So like on the one hand, there's a public speaking aspect, but on another, it's like organization and like creating agendas for meetings and things like that. And so if you find that you've just like poured a lot of effort and time and you've grown a lot through like this one particular activity, then I think it's okay to talk about it to answer more than one question, but just try to highlight like the different things you've gained from it, if that makes sense.
Okay, so this next question is when they ask you to like choose an example of like a conflict or a challenge you've overcome. So they said, is it better to give an academic / professional example or a personal example? Or do you think there's like which one's better? Like, do you think that one is better than the other? Or do you think it's kind of like personal preference?
So personally, I would say it's personal preference because it depends on what's most significant to you. Yes, there's a part of what's relevant to the organization or the school and why they're asking you that, and if there's context behind it. However, if they're asking how you've overcome a conflict or to describe a conflict that you've overcome, that's a lot more them trying to see how your character is going to be when things get difficult. Because when a lot of people go into college, I have many friends and I know many people who are younger years than me who were shocked by the level of difficulty they hit in college or just the struggles that they had if they were away from home or had to figure out, oh, these teachers aren't exactly the most personable with me and I need to make extra efforts and they don't seem that approachable. There are a lot of obstacles you're going to encounter when you start college, and they want to know that if you face any difficulties, you're going to be able to persevere and you're not going to drop and run.
Okay, the next question says that if like a lot of your extracurriculars are political and opposite to an interviewer's personal stance, do you have any tips on how to cover the motive behind why you joined that org without offending their personal beliefs? Like if you have an interviewer who doesn't kind of necessarily believe like or support what you're believing or what you stand for, like your passions and interests, how do you kind of tiptoe around that without like offending them?
I would say this is a tricky one. I would kind of consider, if this is like the schools that you're applying to, I would also ask yourself, if you can't really be open and honest with someone representing the school, is that for sure the school you want to go to? But also I know that there's a ton of other factors that may have to do with family or finances that would need you to go there. So in the case that, you're really trying to get in this school and you do know they have opposite political beliefs, I guess just stress the core values that you see reflected in them. And I know that that sounds kind of vague, but for example, yeah, like with Black Lives Matter, maybe you care a lot about Black Lives Matter because, you have a sense of care for other human beings. And I'm sure that, even if you get into the politics of it, things might get messy, but I'm sure this interviewer also can understand the desire to see like justice for people in general. And so I guess kind of being a bit vague about it while also trying to connect with the core values that the other person might have, even if they're not expressed the same way politically. But that is a very difficult question to navigate. Yeah.
Okay, last question. Let me see. So what do you do if you don't know how to answer a question? If you're kind of like, how can you kind of, I guess, like filler a question if you're not quite sure and need a little bit more time to think?
I honestly would say like speaking slowly can give you time. If someone asks you a question and you really need to think it out, you can just very slowly, like at this pace, like start to tell that story. And it's better to pause than to use fillers. So if someone asks you, for example, like what is the most impactful experience you've had in your high school experience and you don't really know what that is, you can honestly, this is something that I do, is I'll just take my time and really speak at this rate. And that's still better than, filling with ums or likes or stutters.
Yeah, and even just, after they ask the question, you could say, that's a really great question. I need a second to think about that. And then do what Jasmine did can also help.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to go into the kind of more personal kind of questions where we can go out into breakout rooms with one of the panelists and myself, and you'll be able to ask maybe more personal questions or maybe questions that weren't answered yet. So if everyone could just like go and quickly say their name, their school, major, and pronouns real quick, just to kind of refresh everyone's memory. So I'll start. So as I said earlier, I'm Alexi. I'm a sophomore at Stanford, majoring in political science with a minor in human rights, and I'm a sophomore.
My name is Catherine. I'm a sophomore at Yale, majoring in ethics, politics, and economics, and minoring in education studies.
I am Sandy. I'm a freshman at UCSD, and I'm majoring in marine biology.
Hi, I'm Pia, sophomore at Yale, majoring in molecular cellular developmental biology and history of science, medicine, and public health. Sorry, they're a mouthful.
I'm Jasmine, she, her pronouns, sophomore at Stanford, double majoring in race and ethnic studies, and then also international relations. Yeah.
I'm B, she, they pronouns. I'm a third year at SDSU, San Diego State University. I'm majoring in nursing and minoring in counseling and social change.